Welcome to Partners in Health and Biz with your host, Wendy Meyerhoff. Tune in every Saturday for great shows about obtaining and maintaining health, business, and finance. Learn from the experts here at PIHradio.net. And now, broadcasting from the Partners in Health and Biz studio, here's Wendy.
Hello again, folks, and thank you very much for joining back into Partners in Health and Biz. I am the Biz co-anchor, Wendy Meyerhoff. Thanks again for joining me. Today we have a show with special advice for health professionals to learn and pass on relating to nutrition issues for their older patients and those who care for them. And when I say older, I mean starting at age 50 plus, when a lot of us have to start modifying our diets. I was writing about it. Now I'm part of paying attention to it. So helping me today is a great guest, registered dietitian, Rachel Engelhardt. And Rachel's based in the D.C. area, but she has worked with hospitals in New York and D.C., caring for individuals with a variety of medical conditions, from diabetes and obesity to cancer and celiac disease, among others. And she's a registered dietitian, as I said, and a licensed professional counselor. She has even been a heck of a traveler. She has been to the Middle East, she's been to Europe, she's been to all sorts of places that I won't even get into. So she's learned a lot about different cultures and their foods and religious issues and so forth. So she just has about every credential you can imagine, and that's why she was great to get on today. So thank you for coming on board, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me and for that lovely introduction.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Okay. So, as I said, we're talking to our older audience and their providers. So it could be fellow dietitians, it could be the primaries who, I don't know about most primaries, but they usually pull a checklist off of some place like the Dietitians Association site, and they say, here, Mrs. Smith, this is what you should know, type of thing. So to give them a little bit of a better education, what, first of all, are some of the things a nutrition specialist should not absolutely insist on when they're dealing with older patients? Because, for example, I know one might be not forcing a 92-year-old to never, ever have salt again. It might be too late to be fussing with them at that point, is one of the things I was told long ago. So what do you think your colleagues should not absolutely insist on?
Well, first and foremost, you know, the goal is always to help the individual and to really understand where each person is coming from, what the challenges are, what their health concerns are. And it's hard to make any absolute statements one way or the other, but I think the first step is really to understand who you're dealing with and what the main concern is. So if there's elevated blood pressure, let's say the example you gave regarding sodium, but the person's barely eating, it would really be missing the forest for the trees to not realize that first and foremost, you really have to make sure you're nourishing this person, and that you're really addressing their nutrition related, you know, their nutrition first and foremost. Because if someone's not getting the nutrients they need in the first place, like enough to sustain their life and health, then it's really kind of silly to focus on something like their sodium intake, because honestly speaking anyway, if they're not eating very much, they're not likely ingesting a lot of sodium in the first place. So I think it's really looking at the person in whole rather than focusing on any particular nutrient like need or concern.
Okay, that makes good sense. So once you figure that out, is there anything like, if my partner actually, she just had a birthday party for her 90-something-year-old mother, and I won't reveal Mom's actual age. And they did it here in the Baltimore area. The Inner Harbor's a snazzy place, and they took her to a nice restaurant. And yes, she's got dietary issues. I don't remember her list. She probably has diabetes and high blood pressure and things like that. So can our listeners assume that Dr. Smith doesn't have to say to Mrs. McGillicuddy or whoever, well, when you go to your party, you really can't have cake, or you've got to stay away from those barbecue ribs or whatever. What advice do they get for special events like that?
Yeah, well, I certainly hope that wouldn't be the advice given, because really we want to talk about aging with dignity and grace and enjoyment and pleasure, and it's really about ensuring we're doing everything possible to give our senior citizen, like community members, as much joy in their later years of life as possible. And I just think that we can't take the joy out of life, and food is a major part of joy, and especially if someone has limitations in terms of their ambulatory abilities, and food is somewhere that they really derive a lot of pleasure, we certainly should never be taking that away from anyone. We should really be thinking about ways to maximize enjoyment.
Oh, that's
so
good.
I would hope that the recommendation would be to go have a party, go have a great time.
Yeah, try not to overeat. Don't just gulp down everything, except maybe in small portions. We're taught you want a little bit of the ribs, you want a little bit of the birthday cake, you want some of the potato salad or the French fries, but try not to get crazed.
And I think that's definitely fair. Like, I appreciate moderation, but I will say that generally speaking, my experience with a elderly population or senior citizen population is that they're not eating such large quantities that would happen anyway. But generally speaking, people's appetite does decrease, and again, in my experience, obviously everyone's different, but generally speaking, I don't think that there's a need to emphasize quantity per se, because that's something that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as when people are younger and have more robust appetites.
So, when we say elderly, and frankly I try not to use the word, so I'm glad you changed it to seniors.
Yes.
So it's not just, as I say, we're talking in Partners in Health and Biz, we start at like ages 50 and older. So I can understand the 87-year-old may not be gulping, but the 53-year-old might not have learned good lessons yet or forgotten whatever they learned. So what do you have
That's a fair point. I think that's an absolutely fair point.
Okay, and so how do you change the advice, if at all, or do you just, shrug and figure one day is not that big a deal, it's more?
Yeah, well, that's generally the advice I give to people, is that there's really no meal, no day of eating, no, honestly speaking, week of eating that does anything to significantly alter someone's health. It's how we eat, sum total, all the time throughout the calendar that really impacts our health. So am I saying go out and eat everything you want all the time? No, absolutely not. But I think it's okay to mark special occasions by going to your favorite restaurant and ordering your favorite thing. But I always encourage my clients to listen to their body, listen to their hunger, and really nourish themselves in a way that they feel good about. I often say, think about how you want to eat it, how you want to feel at the end of the meal, and let that inform your eating during the course of the meal. So, so I think most people, when I give that example, they say, well, I hate feeling really, really full. Like I feel kind of sick if I overdo it. So that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind. And when you go into the meal, it might be more about seeing options as choices and thinking like, oh, I could have this or I could have that, instead of having like, oh, yeah, I'm going to have all of it, like an all-you-can-eat buffet kind of mentality, which might set you up to then kind of feel kind of sick.
Okay, now I've always been a family cooker. I left home, got married. I didn't have the in-between a lot of women have. So I know nothing about cooking for one person. And so whether you're a 50-year-old divorcee or you're the 80-year-old widower, how do we find out about cooking for one person? Because I don't want to keep throwing lean cuisines in the microwave. So where do we get the right advice? Yes, besides finding great dietitians like you, are there, is it online recipes? What can encourage us?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and it is something that I really appreciate how challenging that can be, especially if it's a new circumstance, if someone's suddenly, eating alone. So first of all, I think that there are great options out there now in terms of meal delivery services. I know that in the DC area, there's one called Galley Foods that offer wholesome prepared meals to the door. And then also there's like a Blue Apron, which is a meal delivery service that has that they basically give you all the components of a meal and instructions of how to assemble it. And there are hundreds of those kinds of programs that are out there, and I think that can be a great resource. I also created a service where I go into my clients' homes to help them either get stocked in their groceries or help them with meal prep or to put things in the freezer just so that they have food on hand. And then I would say that there's another option is that really getting assistance from family and friends and asking people to come over and help you prep meals. That could also be a great option, just asking for help, which I know can sometimes be really challenging, but letting people know that that's something that could be really helpful.
What if, like a lot of the older generation men, they've never really learned to cook? I mean, my dad, you couldn't leave him alone in the kitchen. My husband, thanks God, he loves to prep things. So here, actually, as we're taping later this evening, I'm headed off somewhere to a meeting, and Rich can take care of himself, whether it's using the leftovers I deliberately prepped for today, or he'll make his own crazed soup kind of thing. He can do it, but a lot of the older men, maybe some of them learn to barbecue. I see the guys barbecuing. Yeah. That's their specialty. But just making soup, scrambled eggs, whatever. What advice? And especially if they don't have family nearby, they've retired to Florida, daughter's up in New Jersey. How do they handle this?
Absolutely, that can be really challenging. Something that I don't know that many people know about these services, but a lot of grocery stores have someone who will meet you. If you set an appointment, you can go to the information center and ask for someone to help you with your grocery shopping. Many supermarkets are now offering that service, and that could be a great way to go around the store and look for items that might lend themselves to being really convenient, easy to assemble meals. There are also in-home chefs that you could, that could be available for hire to give like a cooking class or a cooking lesson or even help with some meal prep. And again, in the DC area, I offer an in-home nutrition counseling service. I don't know of others around the nation, but I imagine if I exist here in DC, then there are others that exist around the country. So I think those are all ways to get, for individuals to really get their needs met.
Yeah, I know that if you look up the ADA, the American Dietitians Association site, you can find a lot of people in whatever area you pencil in. I like what you mentioned, and again, this is information not only for the patients and their families, but stuff for our health providers to jot down because they can offer this extra information. I know down where I am in the Baltimore area, the giant supermarkets around here, they started a food program. Not only will they deliver, that gets a little tricky because you have to have $60 worth of food, and if you're all alone and all you need is a container of milk, I took that for granted back home in New York. I walked downstairs and picked up the milk. Here, we keep getting into transportation issues, but in any case, in Giant, if you either look online or they can mail it or it's right in the store when you do get over, they have a new recipe magazine called Savory, and it has coupons in it. It has great ideas for cooking, and so you can probably find some things you can try. But I think the message we must get to older guys and their families, encourage dad, grandpa, whatever, as an adventure if you can. So I think that's an important point to remind providers about.
Absolutely. And I also will say that I know you mentioned like a lean cuisine, that I agree that I know that gets really old, but there are really there's this whole new generation of foods, frozen foods, in those aisles that really can be made into really well-rounded, balanced meals. So things like frozen vegetables that have a really nice long shelf life, and even frozen rice dishes already with ingredients mixed in that are definitely on the more wholesome side. I personally love Trader Joe's variety of frozen foods because I feel like so many of them lend themselves to kind of instant meals. They have pre-made frozen salmon, pre-made frozen chicken, enchiladas, a wide variety of foods. Again, if someone has special dietary restrictions, that might not be the right choice for them. But there is a lot of variety out there. So I also feel...
I'm sorry.